Okay, thank you very much for joining us on our third mock review scenario for this cohort. Heather has been the lucky person selected to do her presentation. This scenario is a short scenario, just 20 minutes of presentation and 20 minutes Q&A, and it's based on the Pollard Financial Services scenario published by Salesforce. So I'm going to go on mute. Thank you very much, Heather. Off you go.
All right, today we're going to be talking about Pollard Financial Services. They're a financial services company that sells to both individuals and businesses and advises them on different funds that they can invest in. We'll start off with the org strategy. There'll be single org, single currency, and single language because they are only based in the United States. So we don't need to worry about translations or currency conversions. And we're also going to be using person accounts to deal with their individual clients. They've got a number of large data volume objects. The account and everything that touches the account or everything that is under the account, such as contacts, contracts, and their funds will be large data because they are servicing millions of clients. Sharing will help mitigate that. We can also use skinny tables to help mitigate some of that, and indexed fields on some of the objects as necessary. For authentication, we won't be using any authentication or SSO because they don't have any requirements for that. The same goes for mobile. We don't need to build any mobile application for them. The system landscape is pretty simple. We're just going to be using standard Salesforce and the customer community. They don't have any internal systems that we need to consider as of this point. Then the data model we have here. We have the account, which is a large data volume, and the client sales rep is going to own that. They'll have both business and person account relationship to the contact. Then they'll have a fund object and an account fund junction that will be a master detail lookup to the account. And we have an account info object that's used to separate the sharing with the account. It has some of the more sensitive information under it. And then we have an investment plan, which will be populated with an analytic snapshot, and the contract. I have this listed as a standard object, but we'll actually be using a custom object as they are not going to be using Sales Cloud. And then the role hierarchy is pretty simple. We have executives, sales reps, which includes both client and business sales reps, their assistants, and then the community user. Actually, the community users will roll up to the sales rep, not the sales rep assistant. And then deployment methodology. We'll have each developer have their own sandbox, which is just a dev sandbox. Each of those developer sandboxes would roll into a QA sandbox, that's a dev pro. They'd have integration testing happen in partial sandbox and then move into UAT followed by staging, and then from staging it would go to production. And we would use continuous integration to keep that tested all through the process. Each developer would have their own Git branch and merge their changes into that branch, and it would go up to the higher branch and test that continuously, so we'd be able to catch problems early on before it gets into a later stage. Licenses. So each of the internal roles will be using a platform license, since there's no requirement for them to do any selling. And then the community users will be Community Plus, since there is a requirement for them to be able to see reports. From the data standpoint, they want to be able to see fund performance and investment plans. So the investment plan is a snapshot in time that's taken every month of the funds that an account has invested in. So that'll be an analytic snapshot that runs every month. And then the fund performance will just be fields on the fund, and then the users will be able to see it through their access to the fund. There's a bit of sharing requirements. So the first one being that the account visibility is limited. It should be the assigned client sales representative that can see it. So we'll have that private and shared with the client sales rep, and then sharing rule to share to their support assistants under them. They should also be able to manually share accounts, but they can only share with other client sales reps, not sales support assistants that are not assigned to them. So we'll use Apex sharing with a custom UI or custom validation to prevent them from manually sharing with other roles. And then some of the information on the account object, such as the tax identification number, should only be visible to the account owner. So we'll move that into a custom object where we'll keep the owner in sync with the account owner. And then the business account sales reps should not have access to employee records under an account. So we'll take away their read access to contacts. And then the investment plan needs to have the same sharing requirements as the basic account info. So we'll use a master detail relationship for that object, and then it will have the same sharing as the account. The funds should be available to all internal users, so we'll make that object public for internal users. And then clients should be able to see and report on their own investment plan. So that can be accomplished with the Community Plus licenses to give them the reporting, and then sharing sets to see their own investment plans that are under their account. And then they also need to be able to edit their own account info. So the field level security and standard community functionality should allow for that. And then they need to be able to upload documents that are shared with their client sales rep. So we'll use Salesforce files to accomplish that. Here we have the objects and whether or not they're available internally or externally. The account, contact, and contract will be private both internally and externally. Then the account fund will have a master detail relationship to accounts, so it'll be controlled by the parent. And then the fund will make public internally but private externally, so that the clients will only be able to see the funds associated with their own account. And then the account info would be private internally and externally again. Reporting, we have the internal clients need to be able to report on their own plan performance. So again, the access to the funds that are associated with their own account will give them the sharing for that, and then we'll run a standard report. And then internally, users will run reports on funds, and they'll have access because that would be a public read internally. Assumptions, we are assuming that they do have unlimited budget, and we're also assuming that they're not really selling to their clients and don't need that functionality in Salesforce. And that's all I have. Are there any questions?
Hi, Heather. So you've got 9 minutes left, which will tag onto the Q&A. So you've got about half an hour's Q&A.
Okay.
Okay. So I have a couple of questions. If you look at page 4, under the data model requirements, it says that they need to, so fund reports that describe, but that the business needs to be able to track fund reports that describe the performance history of a given fund, and these are associated with any investment plan. And a given report may be associated with different clients. Could you open up your data model and just show us how you plan to, because you mentioned an analytics snapshot, so I'm interested to know how you're going to structure your tables around that.
So for the fund performance,
sorry, I'll go on mute.
The fund performance, I assumed that was associated with each fund. So you could see the individual fund performance on the account fund. I think I misunderstood that requirement in that they wanted to be able to see the overall fund performance by account.
Okay, so that's fine. You can make changes if you need to. So what changes would you make if you misunderstood that requirement? What changes would you make now that you feel that you do understand it?
I do think I would make another analytic snapshot to run and on the account funds object and go into a fund performance object.
Okay. And what sort of information would you capture that might change on a fund?
The individual fund performance that is associated with that account fund would be changing frequently.
Okay, so if you're running an analytics snapshot, where will you put the results of that report?
Into a custom object.
Is that the one that you've got crossed out?
Yes, it's that object. It wouldn't go there though. It would go under the account with the investment plan as a separate object under the account, not under the fund.
Are there any limits with the analytics snapshots regarding the record count?
Sorry, could you clarify?
Are there any limits with the analytics
yes. I believe you can only run on 2,000 records at a time. So rather than being an analytic snapshot, we have to do it with a batch job, actually for both fund performance and investment plans.
Okay, thank you. So looking at your sharing, can we go back to look at your table in your, that's it. Okay. So you've mentioned creating an Apex sharing function that would prevent the sharing to assistants not reporting to the owner of the account. Can you think of any alternative methods that we could use to do that?
My original instinct was to use manual sharing, but there is that requirement to be able to share with people who can have access to the record, as far as read-write access, but not be shared if it doesn't report to the owner.
Okay.
I have a question here regarding Apex sharing. When exactly this is going to be triggered? I mean, from a user's perspective, right? Where exactly are you going to put this sharing to prevent this from happening?
We give them a UI, like a visual force page or a lightning component, depending on the experience, to insert that share record that would have that logic to not be able to share with the assistants not reporting to that owner.
Okay.
And same question regarding business sales representative. How do they get access to the accounts when the accounts are owned by the CS client sales representatives?
They can have access, they'll have access through account teams. That's also an account team is another way to give access to the other client reps. That's not manual sharing.
So just going down that route as well. So what would be the process that you would make sure that the same 3 people have access? So the requirements mention that there are possibly 3 support reps that will support 1 individual sales rep. How will you mentioned using account teams? So what's the easiest way for your account team, for your account owners to make sure that those 3 people have access to their account?
You can set up a default account team that has that has 3 people automatically set, and they can reuse that if that's what you're asking.
Okay, thank you.
Or is there any automated way to give access to their subordinates?
The subordinates, I was going to use a sharing rule.
The other thing around account team, if you allow them to use account team, then the second point where we have epic sharing, the user through account team, they can easily override that, right? So is there any way you can prevent them from not sharing the records to assistants if we open up the account team UI?
I'm not sure if account teams, if that, I don't believe it allows validation rules.
Okay.
So I'm not sure there.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We have a requirement on page 4 to make fund reports visible to all internal users. And then on page 5, we have a requirement for fund reports that must only be available to clients who've invested in the fund. Can you tell us how you would arrange your organization-wide defaults to cater for those two requirements?
Right, so that's why we have the fund being public internal and private externally.
Okay. Sorry, timer. Okay, thank you. In terms of obviously making sure that the fund reports are only available to clients who've invested in the fund, how would we know which funds, how would we know if the client has an investment in that fund?
We know because of the account fund object. So we can, the external users can either report on that object with fields from the fund, or we can share the fund when that object is created.
Okay, how would you achieve that?
I'm actually not sure.
Okay, that's fine.
So on page 4, regarding the data model requirements, point 3 and 4, it says investment plan describe how the clients are investing across a variety of funds. So how would you relate investment plan and the funds in your data model?
So I think there would need to be, there maybe needs to be a junction object as well between fund and investment plan. Then the investment plan would have a roll-up summary, can have roll-up summaries to access summary information.
What would the summary information be?
I don't see actually any requirements for summary information.
Okay, that's fine. So, but you would relate those two together,
Right.
okay? Let me just check requirements. However, there is a need also to make sure that investment plans and have basically the same security rights as your basic client information. So that might include your plan funds as well. So if you were to share, if you had a need to share investment plan funds with clients and also the sales reps as well, and it's related via lookup, how would you, what possibilities do you have for that, for meeting that requirement?
Well, I think that would be a master detail relationship with investment plan, and investment plan is also having master detail look up to the account. So then they would automatically have the same sharing to the account.
Okay, thank you. And the investment reports as well. So obviously there's a need to look at the investment plan's performance. And the security requirement around that is, if I can just find it, is also that the performance reports that are specific to a client should also have the same security requirements. So how are you going to control access to the reports, to the investment plan performance reports?
I think that should also be done automatically. If you're running the report, we would be running the report on the investment plan and the fund. So only investment plans that the user has access to would be available in the report.
Just for that individual client? Okay. So what are the ways in, like, what declarative features would you be able to use in order to make that report specific to an individual client? Can you talk me through how you would build that experience for a customer?
For the client report or the internal report?
For the investment plan performance report. So you've mentioned putting that in a folder that only certain people have access to. How would you make it so that that report is specific to a client, so that when they open up, so that when they go to view it, they can only see the results for their individual account?
Either way, because it's controlled by sharing, they won't be reporting on records that they don't have access to. So they would only, like internally, they would only be seeing their own clients' accounts, and externally they'd be seeing their own account. Internally, they could run reports off of individual accounts because of the investment plan and its lookup to account. They could filter it by accounts.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions, please?
Yes, I have a question around the requirement under accessibility requirements where we say business account sales reps should not have access to the related employee accounts. In your sharing model, can you explain how do you achieve that?
Yeah, so the contact is private, and then on the business sales rep profile, they just don't have access to contacts. No access for them, not read access, so they'll never see contacts.
So do you think by doing that you are not allowing them to create any kind of contacts from the platform? So you just prevent them not using the contact feature at all?
Right.
Do you still think that's a good idea, or you want to stick to that design?
If they don't have other requirements to look at accounts, and if they're not, if the requirement is they're not able to see accounts even on their own or contacts on their own accounts, it doesn't, I believe they don't need access to contacts and don't need access.
So if they don't need access to contacts, certainly the business reps, they're selling to businesses, and they have people that they have relationships at those at these businesses. On the second side of things, we have employees at that business who are actively part of that investment plan. So how would you ensure that you're meeting the requirement for the business reps not to see employees, yet they're still able to do their job, which is relationship management?
Well, I don't see that this client does have a requirement for selling. They're not talking about opportunities or leads or this. It seems to be more of a fund management application, but taking away that assumption, if that were true that the business sales reps are using CRM and its traditional function, then they would need access to contacts, and we would be giving them access through account teams and on the account teams, not giving them access to contacts there.
Can you have a look at page 3 and look at the project overview section? And it talks, what does it say about the business sales reps?
Oh, it does say that they are managing relationships. So we will change the design then so that they do have access to contacts, and it would be private, and through the account team will not share the contacts.
Okay, and what assumptions have you made about contacts? Who do they represent?
That they represent employees for business accounts and individual clients as person accounts.
Are there any other types of individuals that your sales reps might work with in the process of managing a relationship?
I don't think so.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Who will be the owner of the contact?
The owner would be the client sales rep that is managing the business client.
I have a question around the last last line, which is talking about clients must be able to upload documents to share with their assigned client sales reps.
Right.
How do you achieve that?
We'll use Salesforce files for that.
Okay, and then what would be the process for a client to share that with the sales reps?
They'll go to their files tab, upload it, and then through the role hierarchy that the user is a part of, the sales rep would be able to see that.
Okay.
Okay, that's the Q&A is all done now. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, should we go round and give Heather our feedback? We'll start with Waruna because he's got his mic on. Haha.
So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think since the case was it didn't have a lot of details, I think it's good if you can if you have given the assumptions in the very beginning. For example, data loads. There's no data loads. Integration. I think some of the assumptions you went through, but compared to other cases, since it didn't have a lot of details, it's good if you're given the assumptions to be clear with everybody else. And I think on the data model, there's some missing components, missing things that I think that was questioned, especially around this funds and the relationship between funds and investment plan. So I think those were described in one line in the scenario. I think since we probably didn't read, you missed that line, so that kind of gave a wrong impression on the model. But I think you're sharing the rules that you put, requirements. That was pretty good. The way you've done it, and also the way you presented the visibility on different objects. That was good as well. That's my feedback, Heather.
Okay, thank you, Jitendra.
So yeah, I can go. So Heather, I love the introduction slide. That was very good, and you laid out assumptions very well, like no SSO, no mobile. So that was good. Your license slide was also very good. So you distributed licenses very well. Security slide was also good. So I missed that slide, but that's a really good one. To explain what exactly is the requirement and what the solution you came up. So few feedbacks like which I think area needs to improve is object detection, like how many objects we are going to have in the scenario. So that is something. And the volume of the users, right? It's around 20 million. So I didn't saw anything coming from you that how we are going to manage that in single. I love your deployment slide. So that was very detailed. Which sandbox is going to do what, really great. And yeah, just a couple of few points for the security where I think we need to see how the pack sharing is going to work and those stuff. But everything else is good at that. That's my feedback.
Thanks, Jitendra. Tushar?
Thank you. Yeah, from my side, I think it was a good presentation with details around all the components. Although this scenario was specifically asking for data model and access requirement, so maybe you could have focused more on those two entities, maybe, right? And then on the data model side, a few key objects were missing in terms of fund performance and how investment plan and funds are related. The other one is around, I think, the visibility. I think you spoke about it around the account team, which I think is going to play a big role in terms of visibility. So that we could have highlighted in the data model. That would be one. Then beyond that, I think the sharing rule. I think the contact that's still not giving access to contact in a CRM platform. That would be a little bit that might be off, right, from a design perspective. So we could have given some alternatives around that. But I think, those are the key points from my side. But beyond that, I think the presentation was good, pretty detailed. So it is good. Thank you.
Thank you. Nidesh?
I would say the overall presentation was good. Maybe the sequencing of the slides, like talking about the data model first and then talking about the large data volumes and all. And maybe, like Tushar said, including the account team members in the data model. And also the role hierarchy didn't had all the actors in there. Maybe adding everyone in there, like business sales representative was not represented on the role hierarchy. And work more on the sharing roles, like how we can use the standard sharing roles of sharing account with the roles and subordinates of the owner. Yep. So yeah, I would say that's it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, my feedback. So you had a really good mix of systems. Obviously, we were only talking about Salesforce because this, I think, was a section retake for security. So I thought you correctly identified the right community to use. I also thought that you correctly identified the right solution for sharing data within that community. So being able to share account data and related items with external users, you correctly identified sharing sets for those, which was really good. Correct license for community users as well for Community Plus, and that was because of the sharing requirements that were given. A couple of things that you did differently to what I would have done, but you justified really well. One of the things that you talked about was the investment plan performance reports. Now, what I thought was really interesting there is that you actually took that requirement quite literally as a report. I don't know about anybody else. I actually had that down as an object. And I had it down as a risk because it would have been 63.6 million records potentially, because if you're looking at 5.2 million customers once every month, and you're loading that in every month, then that's a huge data volume. But the reason I chose that was because of the visibility option. But I thought, as you started to talk through that, I started to think of a different way of doing it, which was around reports and being able to track changes to an investment plan and the data that you collect against that plan. And I thought, yeah, she's got that because she's talking about investment plan funds rolling up to investment plans with all of the figures. We had to kind of tease it out of you, but we got there in the end. But you were talking about that performance data coming into an investment plan, and then I thought if you were showing that in a report, you could hide the report, but then you could also use something like report charts to make it very specific to that customer, so that when they log in through the community, they can see that. And I thought, yeah, that would work potentially. I thought you justified that well. I would have taken a point off because it wasn't the first thing you suggested. I believe in the review board, I think it was Andrew who said in a previous call that if you present it, you'll get higher marks than if they have to get it out of you during Q&A. But yeah, I thought that was fair, and I thought that was a good way of getting around that such a significant volume of data as well. If you're just tracking those changes, and the analytics snapshots was an interesting way of doing that. Again, there were a few items missing on your data model, just to echo what my colleagues have said. So I would have actually had investment plan employees as a separate object, or as a second record type for contacts. And then some sharing rules around that, some criteria-based sharing rules to ensure that if you've got a contact of type employee that there's no relationship with between you and the business, then you could potentially hide those from the business reps, and then so that they can still carry on working with their key contacts at the business to build a relationship. So that's another way of doing it. I actually had it as a custom object just to keep things tidy, and because also there's 300,000 of those plus 20 million contacts generally, because if you think about your person accounts that you're going to use, they're actually contacts as well. So I thought that was okay. There was also a missing object, client fund reports, but I think you had that as account funds. But there was a requirement to span multiple clients on a fund report to report how a fund is actually doing. But I thought you had correctly identified the sharing on that, which was excellent. One thing I would say is that if in this scenario, we didn't need to cover the system landscape necessarily, but I thought that it was good that you did, especially for this context. And the dev life cycle wasn't actually in the scenario, so I wouldn't have actually bothered presenting it at that stage. However, it made sense, and it demonstrated your practical working knowledge of that process, which is really good. There was a couple of bits of advice I would say is to perhaps try and get involved in some projects where private sharing is a need. I thought that you at the beginning, one of your solutions talking about the 3 sales assistants being aligned to 1 sales rep, that was quite obviously a default account team requirement, and you acknowledged that during the Q&A. It's just during the presentation you said that you wanted to use Apex for that. So we did kind of lead you down the garden path on that one. So I would possibly put, and I'm going to say the same thing to someone I know as well, who's working on sharing and visibility at the moment, and that's to perhaps spin up a Trailhead org and perhaps try and replicate these requirements in the Trailhead org, and then test it. Just try creating records and logging in as each rep type, because at the moment we're talking in theory. The easier way for it to go in would be to actually try and build it and then see what happens when you practice the sharing. I also thought there was 1 or 2 occasions where you had missed an Apex sharing requirement. But in other situations, you'd use Apex sharing for a declarative requirement. So that's another reason I think it would be good for you to perhaps get involved in a project or some pre-sales opportunities within your employment, where you've got some private sharing involved, or even if you've got people who are stuck with sharing in your organization, perhaps sit down with them and go through it with them, and it will help you to translate some of that theory into practice. And that's all the feedback I have. How did you feel about that, Heather?
It was tough. Yeah, I realized, like halfway through that, I missed things and they were wrong. Like, as the questioning was going through, I like your idea to kind of go through and maybe like take the scenarios and like build them out to see like if the idea is right and get that experience. I think you all gave really good feedback, so I know now better what to do next.
Okay. Your org strategy was good, and your introduction was excellent as well. So I think if everybody's learned something from that, then that's wonderful.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, guys. Well, thank you, and thank you so much to Heather for being our brave presenter this evening. Really, really appreciate it, and we'll meet again next week. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.